Welcome into my 2024-2025 NFL quarterback tier list for the season here. We've got 10 different categories breaking down pretty much every relevant quarterback in the NFL, the 32 starters, as well as some relevant backups as well. So you can see the different categories here, but let's just go ahead and dive right into this tier list here. Let me know what I get wrong, who I have too high and too low. Starting with Josh Allen, I think Allen is a really tough one. Going to put him in this elite franchise quarterback tier. I think the conversation with Allen is his turnovers versus his big play ability. And he puts the ball in harm's way more than almost any other quarterback in the NFL. And I think that definitely needs to be taken into account. But his rushing ability, his just cannon arm, his playmaking ability, he pretty much leads the league in big-time throw percentage pretty much every year. He does also lead the league in turnover-worthy play percentage almost every year. But I think, you kind of live with the ups and downs of Josh Allen because the highs are so high. And he does need to get over the hump in the playoffs. He needs to beat Patrick Mahomes, beat Joe Burrow. But I think at the end of the day, if we're talking about pure talent and what these guys can do on the football field, I think Josh Allen has proven that he is an elite quarterback and, certainly has the skills to back it up as well. So we're going to put him in this elite franchise quarterback tier. We are also going to rank them within the tiers as well. For the most part, we're probably not going to do so as much for these backup types like Tyson Bagent. He stepped in perfectly fine for Justin Fields, and he looked like he could hang as a quarterback that is a career backup and is somebody that can maybe step in and win you a few games, but I definitely don't think he's really anything more than that. Moving to Jacoby Brissett, I would say he's kind of your perfect replacement level bridge quarterback, and I like what the Patriots did bringing him in to have Drake May sit behind him. Jacoby Brissett is a guy that you definitely can still remain competitive with. He's not a complete punt on the quarterback position. I think he's the perfect guy to mentor some of these younger players, and I do like Jacoby Brissett. I think you have to be realistic with what he is. He's probably a top 32 quarterback in the NFL as of this point, but he's also probably not going to be your long-term answer. And any team signing him to be that long-term answer is kidding themselves, but I think he settled in really nicely as a nice bridge quarterback. He's somebody that you are looking to upgrade, but you can certainly get by with. And I do think he has been a little underrated in his play over the past couple of years. Jake Browning, I do think he is a high-end backup. He stepped in pretty well for the Bengals in Joe Burrow's absence, and I do think he played as a decent, adequate, high-end backup there that, you can definitely still run the offense through and pick up a couple of wins. That's what I think he proved last year with a good team around him. Then going to Joe Burrow, the starter for the Bengals, going to put him in this elite franchise quarterback tier as well. I think I have three guys in this elite franchise quarterback tier. You could put them in really any order. I am going to put Josh Allen above Joe Burrow. I think his durability has been better as well. That's really the only question I have with Joe Burrow at all is his ability to stay healthy, because he's been really the only one that's proven he can beat Patrick Mahomes, had a lot of success in the playoffs. He's been amazing since joining the Bengals. The only thing really holding him back is the injury. So if he can stay healthy, definitely think he can, be at the very top of that elite franchise quarterback tier. Moving to Derek Carr, and I've really, really soured on Derek Carr at this point. I think maybe he's a little bit above Jacoby Brissett, but not by much. I do think he's a replacement level quarterback. At this point in his career, I know the numbers look all right, but I just don't think he's a guy that you can win with, really, even at this point. The Saints don't have an atrocious roster, and he did not take full advantage of it. He's definitely not a guy that you're winning because of his pocket presence, his anticipation. He can go out and operate a offense relatively effectively, but when it comes to anything outside of the structure of the play, he just absolutely cannot do it. And so he needs kind of a perfect system around him. He needs a good team around him. And to me, that's just kind of your definition of a replacement level quarterback. I would say he's no better than a bottom 10 starting quarterback in the NFL. And that's going to put you in that replacement level tier for me personally. Then we are going to go with Kirk Cousins. Going to put him in the great quarterbacks tier. I think obviously we'll see how he does coming off the injury as a pretty old quarterback at this point in his career. He definitely needs to prove that he can bounce back. But I am excited to see what he can do with some of the playmakers that Atlanta has. I think he'll be in a good system where he doesn't have to do too much. They can lean on Bijan Robinson. He has good weapons around him. I think Kirk Cousins is in a good spot, and he does need to prove that he can still be a really good quarterback. But at this point, I definitely think he's earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He's not going to be a guy that you are consistently winning because of. He's not super creative outside the structure of the offense, but I do think he is very good at operating the offense and being effective, making the right reads, being accurate. I think he's a good player. Then we are going to go with Daniel Jones, and once again, just think he's a replacement level quarterback. His running ability does definitely give him a little bit of upside, and that might be why he still has a starting job, to be frank. But his passing is just not good. He's a poor decision maker. He turns the ball over too much. He's inaccurate. I just don't think Daniel Jones is a particularly good quarterback. I don't think the Giants believe that Daniel Jones is a particularly good quarterback. And so, I do think that he is very clearly somebody that the Giants are actively looking to replace. And I think it makes a lot of sense to put him in that replacement level tier there. Andy Dalton, a high-end backup. I think he's somebody that can come in with his veteran experience. Obviously started for the Bengals for many, many years. I still think he's somebody that you can play for a game and look pretty good. He played one game for Bryce Young when he was banged up and actually kind of outperformed Bryce Young in that game. So I think that Dalton is still one of the higher-end backup quarterbacks in this league. Jayden Daniels, this is obviously going to be a wait and see. We're going to put him in that young and unproven high potential tier. I think this tier is really reserved for guys that we haven't seen a lot of, that we're very hopeful for. We believe they have high potential, but it's too hard to really rank them too high. I have them above that replacement level tier because I do think these are guys that you're building a franchise around. You're excited to watch. They have high upside to climb into these higher tier ranks as their careers get started. I think Daniels is definitely in that category. His dual threat ability is definitely very entertaining. I think that he does need to protect himself much better. He's a skinny guy. I think that he can attack the middle of the field much better as well. I think his arm is just kind of adequate, but there's a lot of playmaking ability. He was the Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. He's a very dynamic and fun player, and I am excited to see what the Commanders do with him this year. Sam Darnold is going to be the starting quarterback after J.J. McCarthy did tear his meniscus, so be curious to see what that looks like in a Kevin O'Connell offense, which I do really believe in Kevin O'Connell, but Sam Darnold has his chances. And yes, he might look like a decent player within this scheme, but do I honestly think that he's going to be someone that turns into a Pro Bowler just because he has Justin Jefferson and a good scheme around him? It's within the realm of possibility, but I would say that there's much lower potential for Sam Darnold to turn into a really good quarterback in this league. I think he can be someone that, maybe run a good system through and he's an effective player, but I don't think he's ever going to be probably too much more than that. But he is still relatively young. He's unproven, and he's going to get a chance to really kind of be in a good situation for the first time in his career. So I am interested to see what Darnold does, but he certainly doesn't earn the benefit of the doubt at this point. Tommy DeVito up next. I think that he, filled in admirably and was somebody that the Giants fans liked watching. Just, he was a fun player to watch, but I don't think he's really much more than a career backup type. Moving on from him, Justin Fields. I think I am going to put him in this low potential tier, young and unproven. The Bears definitely didn't do any favors for Justin Fields, surrounding him with terrible supporting cast until his final year. But I will say that Justin Fields has the physical traits that make him a high potential player. His rushing ability, his cannon arm, he has the traits, but he is just far too inconsistent. He's a poor processor. Don't think he has very good accuracy. I think that at this point, Justin Fields is going to be an erratic young player, and maybe the Steelers in a new situation can get a little bit more out of that, but I don't think he's ever really going to be able to consistently hone things in, consistently be a good processor, a good decision maker, accurate quarterback enough within the structure of the play that he's anything more than just kind of a guy that you throw out there and you don't know what you're going to get. That's just really tough to live with at the quarterback position. So I do think there is just a lower potential, not because of the physical traits, but because I just think the inconsistencies are way too much for a team to really believe in him as a true starting quarterback in this league. Next up, we have Joe Flacco. He is a high-end backup. I mean, he's an old player, and I don't know that he's necessarily some special playmaker that a lot of Browns fans made him out to be. He was a lot better than Deshaun Watson, but he was in a good scheme with good playmakers around him. I think he can operate an offense, and I think he's a perfectly fine, capable backup. He is old. I don't think he's the most consistent player in the world. He's kind of got that just gunslinger mentality because he has nothing to lose at this point in his career. But I do think that at this point, he really is just kind of one of those high-end backups. Jimmy Garoppolo, kind of the same thing. Not really ranking these guys within the tiers for the backups, but I don't think Garoppolo is anything more than a backup quarterback at this point. He pretty much lost the job to Aiden O'Connell halfway through the year and never got it back. And I think that's pretty telling, as Aiden O'Connell was just kind of benched and replaced by Gardner Minshew this year. So I don't think there's a lot to say about Jimmy Garoppolo. I think his best days are behind him. And, wasn't a Super Bowl at one point as the starting quarterback. I don't think that's going to be the case anytime soon. Jared Goff, really one of the very interesting quarterbacks in this. I am going to put him in this great quarterback tier. I think that for him, he is in an amazing system for his skill sets. Ben Johnson does a fantastic job putting him in great situations. He has a great offensive line in front of him. Amon-Ra St. Brown's one of the most reliable receivers at getting open and consistently finding those open spots in the zone. He's got great playmakers, Laporta and other guys on this team. I think he does a fantastic job operating that scheme very well, and I do think that the Lions could win a Super Bowl with him at the helm. And I think any of these, good Mahomes-level quarterbacks have the potential of winning a Super Bowl. And I think Goff is absolutely no stranger to that. I do think very highly of him. I do have him as a top 10 quarterback on this list. So, I do give major props to Jared Goff for what he has been able to do. A lot of people wrote him off, including myself, when he moved over from the Rams. The Rams kind of shipped him off, and he was a McVay reject, and a lot of people thought that he was just a product of Sean McVay, and he's fully disproven that that's the case. And I think he's turned into a really good player for this Lions team. I wouldn't say that he's necessarily elevating this team on a super consistent basis, but he operates the system extremely well. He's very efficient. He's pinpoint accurate. He is a good decision maker. He's exactly what this Lions team needs. And, that makes him a really great quarterback in the NFL here. Moving to Taylor Heinicke, another high-end backup or so. He's definitely had some starting experience. He's not someone that is ever going to be one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, but I do think that if he comes in, he can definitely spare you a game or two. Then we're going to go to Justin Herbert, putting him in this near elites tier. I do think this is going to be a little bit of a down season for Justin Herbert. I think that the culture within the Chargers is undergoing a huge shift with Harbaugh at the helm. Don't think Greg Roman, to be honest, is the best hire for Justin Herbert specifically. I think that for Herbert, he is going to be someone that has kind of been a product of tough circumstances throughout his career. I think Brandon Staley was one of the worst head coaches in the NFL when he was there for a long time. The offensive coordinators were atrocious, wouldn't let him throw the ball downfield. I think that, this is not going to be the best situation for him, as Quinn Johnston and Josh Palmer are his top wide receivers on this team. But when you look at Herbert in a vacuum, he has all of the traits to be an elite level quarterback. I think that he could turn into an elite franchise quarterback, but he's got to get over the playoff hump. He's got to more consistently have a little bit better pocket presence, be able to consistently, elevate his team, win games, and kind of push this team to the playoffs. I think that the team success is not a full quarterback stat, but he has not been able to get over that hump, and that's something he needs to do to get into that rare territory with some of the other top guys in the league here. Sam Howell, I definitely think, had a lot of issues on film last year. He's somebody that I do think could turn into a really good backup quarterback and maybe some spot starter Jacoby Brissett type of player, but for now, I do think that he is probably someone that is young and unproven with lower potential. He took way too many sacks, put the ball in harm's way way too much. He had decent numbers, but it was purely volume, and I don't think that he is going to be a starting quarterback in the league in the future here. Tyler Huntley, I do think, is one of the higher-end backups in the league. Stepped in really well for Lamar Jackson 2 years ago. I think that, he's somebody that you can rely on to come in, spot start, win you a couple games if you need to with a good roster around him. I think he is a pretty good player and, somebody that you do like to have in your quarterback room. Jalen Hurts is a really tough one. I do think he took a pretty significant step back last year, but I am going to put him in this great quarterback tier. He is a playmaker. I think he's really good with his legs. I think that, he can take advantage when the scheme is really, really good. I do think Shane Steichen put him in really great situations. I'll be curious to see what Kellen Moore does with him. I do think the range on Jalen Hurts is going to be a little bit wider than, a lot of other quarterbacks on this list, he's just very divisive as far as how good people think he is. I think he's a really good quarterback, but I do think that he has some limitations that do prevent him from being in that truly elite tier. I think that, when it comes to a pure passer, there are guys that are just kind of better around the league. Lamar Jackson is the fourth guy in this elite franchise quarterback tier. You can really put him in any order. I have Allen, then Lamar, then Burrow, and you could really argue anyway. I'm not going to argue too hard. For Allen, it's the turnovers. For Lamar Jackson, it's, is he consistently able to win within structure and everything? Is he able to win in the playoffs? With Burrow, it's health. All three of those guys have challenged Mahomes. I think they're the next best crop in this NFL, but I do think that they are still all clearly a tier down from Patrick Mahomes, who we'll get to in a minute. Then we have Trevor Lawrence, and Lawrence, I think, has become way overhated. I do really like Trevor Lawrence. I think that he had a little bit of a down season. His wide receivers were not making plays for him. He started a little bit slow, but really came on towards the end of the year. I do think Trevor Lawrence is still one of the better young quarterbacks in the NFL. I think he's a great quarterback. He's a playmaker, somebody that can extend plays with his legs. He's got a cannon of an arm. Obviously, maybe he hasn't turned into this bona fide superstar that the Jaguars drafted him to be out of Clemson, number 1 overall pick, most hyped quarterback prospect I could ever remember, besides maybe Caleb Williams. But with Trevor Lawrence, I do think that he still has a lot of room to grow, but he has really solidified himself as one of the best 15 quarterbacks in the NFL, and I think some people have looked how good he has been just because Jacksonville didn't have the best kind of season last year. They fell off a little bit. I do think it'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back and prove some people wrong in that regard. Next up, we have Will Levis, and I am going to put Will Levis ahead of Jayden Daniels here. Levis has started NFL games. I do think that he showed he has a huge arm. Some of the plays he made are absolutely ridiculous. Rolling to his right, throwing to the back left of the end zone. He showed he has a true cannon of an arm. Started off his NFL debut with 4 touchdowns, but then had 4 touchdowns and pretty much the entire rest of the season. Didn't look nearly as good. So I think with a much better scheme for his skill sets around him, with Brian Callahan being brought in, Calvin Ridley, some other targets, I think he can be in for a much better season. Be curious to see what he is able to do in that new scheme and able to take that next step. Drew Lock, I do think, is just a high-end backup. Maybe not one of the better high-end backups, but I do think he can step in and maybe give you a little bit of juice. I don't have a lot of faith in him, but, I do think he's one of the better backups in the league. Jordan Love, I am extremely high on. I have him in this near-elite tier. The second half of last season in the playoffs, I was a fan of Jordan Love before, and I did think that the Packers didn't really make a mistake by drafting him. I really liked him coming out of school. I think that he really turned it on after a little bit of a slow start. With a wide receiver core that was really young and learning with him, he became arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL in the second half of last season in the playoffs. I think they've added playmakers. I really, really like what this Packers offense has looked like. And Jordan Love, I do truly believe, is going to be cemented as a top 10 quarterback in the league after this year. I think his playmaking ability, his arm, his true just physical traits are really impressive. And as he settled in, I think he became really good at making decisions, reading defenses. I really do like Jordan Love and do think he is, as advertised when it comes to the hype around him. Next up, with Mac Jones, I am going to put him in this kind of young, unproven, low potential tier. I think that pretty much everything that could have gone wrong for Mac Jones over the past couple of years, terrible offensive coaching, terrible playmakers, didn't really seem like the head coach was jiving with him as well. I think that, in a lot of ways, Mac Jones was put not in a position to be successful, but he also played really poorly as well. So I do think now kind of being shipped away in a true backup role, I don't think that he is going to prove himself as a starting quarterback by any means, but I do think he can still be a decent backup, maybe becomes a spot starter, someone like Jacoby Brissett or one of those guys that are a true bridge quarterback. I do think he could turn into that kind of player in the future. I don't think he has super high potential, though. Then we've got Patrick Mahomes, and truly, he's just on a tier of his own. As much as a Bengals fan as I want to root against this guy, and, he frustrates me with just how darn good he is, you can't argue it. He's the best quarterback in the league. He's the best player in the league. He's a Hall of Famer already, and, you just can't argue with his playmaking ability, his arm strength, his arm talent, his accuracy, his playmaking. It's just all there. And I do think that you can make the argument that, if he continues on this pace, he might be the GOAT. And there's really just no arguing with it. It's everybody is a clear tier below him when it comes to success, when it comes to playmaking ability, everything else. Mahomes is just the best. And I think anybody that says otherwise is just kidding themselves. Then we're going to go Marcus Mariota. He's a backup at this point, maybe a higher-end backup, but really nothing more to say about him. Drake May, I do think, is obviously somebody that I truly believe in. I had a very, very high grade on him to the point that, I do think the Patriots is a tough location to go because a lot of the things we talked about with Mac Jones are still there. Terrible weaponry is still definitely there. They've added some young pieces, but we'll see if that changes. Jerome Mayo, the offensive coaching, definitely not proven in that coaching room as well. So I think May is going to benefit from sitting a little bit behind Jacoby Brissett, but the potential is absolutely there as the number 3 pick, the number 2 player in my draft board. I definitely think that, he has tons of potential to turn into a star in this league if everything goes well for him in New England. Baker Mayfield up next, and I think Mayfield is a tough one. I'm going to put him in this good quarterback tier. He definitely had a career year with Tampa Bay last year, and I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think Dave Canales deserves a lot of credit for getting that out of him as well. I think he had good playmakers. He operated the scheme really effectively. I think he was a playmaker at times, but do I really believe that Baker Mayfield is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL? No, I do think that he can be a quarterback that leads your team to a playoff run and maybe is a little frisky like the Buccaneers were last year, but I don't think that he's a true elevator. I think that he is a good product of a good system right now, and I'll be curious to see if that continues now that Canales has left. But I don't want to discredit what Baker Mayfield has done. It's really impressive. As it looked like his career was pretty much over, I commend him for getting his career back on track, looking like a top 20 to 25 quarterback in the NFL here, and I do think that he can continue to be that caliber of player for this Buccaneers team. J.J. McCarthy, obviously now the news of him tearing his meniscus is not going to play this year, but you still have to put him in this high potential tier. We'll see him next season. We'll see what he'll be able to do within that Kevin O'Connell offense. Do think that he might be kind of the presumed starter at that point, as he'll kind of have a redshirt year. So he's very wait and see. I think he was raw coming out of Michigan. I thought he would have benefited from a redshirt year. Obviously, you wish it didn't come due to injury, so he could have still practiced and gotten those reps in physically, but I think it'll help him, and I think he will likely be the starter for the future. Joe Milton, incredibly raw, but I guess in theory he is young and unproven. He's really inconsistent, and I think for a lot of the reasons that we talked about Justin Fields, I don't think he'll ever be a quality quarterback in the league, but in theory he is a guy that has traits that make him interesting. Gardner Minshew is definitely kind of on this replacement level tier as well. I think that Minshew has had some nice spurts. I think that he is a tough competitor, somebody that has probably the weakest arm and maybe the entire NFL when it comes to backup quarterbacks, starting quarterbacks, at least the worst starting quarterback arm in the NFL. But I really do like him. He's accurate. He's a good decision maker. He kind of, he's just one of those guys that you do tend to root for, and I do like Gardner Minshew. I don't know that he's going to be, a high-quality player and anything more than a bridge quarterback type, but I do like him in that role, and I think that's exactly kind of what the Raiders are looking for as well as they look for their long-term answer at quarterback, potentially next year. Kyler Murray, I think, is a really tough conversation because obviously he hasn't played a whole lot in a couple of years, but towards the back end of last year, and I think a lot of people forget how good Kyler Murray is. He's electric with the ball in his hands. I am going to put him in this great quarterback tier. There's a lot of quarterbacks in this tier, but he is a true electric playmaker. I think in an offense that's not designed by Cliff Kingsbury, he can really thrive as well. So I do like Kyler Murray. He's a really fun playmaker. Now a little bit further removed from that injury with Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, I do think he's going to have a pretty big year and remind people why he at one point was in the MVP conversation. And I do think at some point he can kind of get back to that level as well. Then we've got Bo Nix. I am going to put him in this higher potential. I will say, I don't think he's ever going to turn into an elite franchise quarterback, but I definitely think he could get into this like great quarterbacks tier of guys like Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff and guys that are maybe not the most physically talented players, but they are really good at reading defenses, knowing where to go with the ball, accurate quarterbacks. I wasn't the biggest Bo Nix fan, but with Sean Payton, I think he's an ideal fit within that system. I do think he's going to put up better numbers than people expect, and I do think that he'll end up being a quality starting quarterback. He does have to prove it, obviously, as a first-round pick rookie this year. We'll be curious to see what he can do. Aiden O'Connell, going to put him in this kind of young, unproven, low-potential tier. I think that in theory he could be like a bridge quarterback type of guy, but I don't really think he's anything more than that. The Raiders have passed him over for Gardner Minshew, so I think he's more going to be a career backup type. I think he'll eventually slide into this kind of high-end backup tier. But he did show a couple of, interesting plays with the Raiders back into last year. So for now, I think that's a good tier to put him in. Michael Penix, going to throw him in here as well, and I'm going to move Nix ahead of McCarthy, just since McCarthy is not going to be playing this year. Penix, I do think, is going to have to wait his turn in Atlanta because Kirk Cousins did just sign a big deal there, and I think ultimately Penix will be their starting quarterback, and he will be pretty good for them, but it's going to take a good bit of time, and for an older prospect, I still question the draft strategy, but I still think he has a high potential and could turn into a really good player for this team as well. Kenny Pickett, I do truly think is a backup. I don't think he is even a high-end backup. I think he was pretty horrendous for the Steelers last year, and even though I'm not a big fan of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, I think they clearly upgraded in that regard. Michael Pratt, I think, actually was a little bit better than a lot of people thought, and I don't know why he slipped as far as he did. He's nothing more than a backup quarterback to Jordan Love, but I do think that, in theory, he could turn into a high-end backup, maybe a replacement level quarterback for another team at some point. So going to put him in that tier for now, just as he is a rookie. Dak Prescott, going to put him in this great quarterback tier. It's kind of this cluster of guys. He had an exceptional season last year, was very accurate, didn't have a ton of turnovers, led the league in passing. This guy is very efficient with the ball in his hands. He's somebody that throws with great anticipation, great accuracy, can operate an offense very effectively. You got to get over the playoff hump at some point, and, Dak has not performed his best in the playoffs as well, and I do think that matters. I think kind of he's just in this cluster of good quarterbacks. He's kind of fringe top 10-ish to, 16. I think all of these guys within this great quarterback tier, like I said, in theory, with a good team around them, you could win with and even because of, and you could win a Super Bowl with them. But I think Dak firmly is in that tier. I just wouldn't say that he's near elite or anything like that within my kind of analysis. And Brock Purdy is very much the same way. I think that he does a fantastic job operating the Shanahan offense, and I think he deserves a lot more credit than a lot of people give him. I think he's way more than just a true system quarterback that, Shanahan could do it with anyone. I don't believe that at all. I think Brock Purdy is genuinely a very good NFL quarterback, but I do think there are some deficiencies when it comes to the physical talent. I don't think he's a crazy playmaker, though I do like some of his playmaking ability a lot more than people give him credit for. I just don't think he's necessarily an elite quarterback, even though the numbers sometimes may suggest that, just because he's in an exceptional offense with great playmakers and great coaching. But you have to commend Purdy for being able to take advantage of that and operate the system as effectively as he does. So, as kind of lazy as it may seem, I do think it's right down the middle. I do think he's a bit of a system quarterback, but he deserves a ton of credit for how he operates that system and how effective he is with his anticipation and decision-making and timing that, he is truly a really great quarterback in the NFL as well. Someone I like a bit less is Russell Wilson. He is just someone that doesn't attack the middle of the field very well. I do think he's a replacement level quarterback. I think he's not like a complete liability like Kenny Pickett was for the Steelers team last year. And so I do truly think it is an upgrade, just not somebody that is a super exciting player. I mean, the Broncos are paying millions and millions of dollars to play for another team next year. So I think that tells you all the Broncos thought of him. And that doesn't mean everything, but I do think he is pretty much just, he's not as mobile as he once used to be. He's very one-dimensional at attacking the outside of the field. He's not very good at attacking the middle of the field. That's been a consistent theme throughout his career. He takes bad sacks. He's not always the best decision maker. I think at this point in Russ's career, he is truly a replacement level player. Spencer Rattler is kind of an interesting player. I do think that he, in theory, has traits to turn into a starting quarterback in the league. I don't know that his consistency is ever really going to be there, but I will say I do actually like him to maybe be kind of this bridge quarterback for the Saints if they move on from Carr. If they can't get some elite young quarterback prospect, I wouldn't mind them giving Rattler a try because I think the traits are there, and I think he was well worth the investment in the 5th round this year. Going to go with Anthony Richardson next, and he's going to be in this young, unproven, high potential tier here, and I'm going to put him right here. I think that the 4 games that we saw of him were really impressive, but they were also 4 games, and I think people perhaps overrate that a little bit. I still think there's accuracy concerns. I still think there's winning from the pocket that might not always be the most consistent, but he is a playmaker. He's huge. He's dynamic as a runner. He's got a cannon of an arm. And I do think that the Colts should be excited about what he can be. I think Colts fans are very understandably excited about the potential that this guy has. He's got to stay healthy. Hopefully, the injuries are not a recurring theme for him, but I think Anthony Richardson has all the talent in the world. My opinion of him really hasn't changed based on the 4 games he played last year, but somebody with incredibly sky-high potential that needs to hone in on the consistency of the position as well. Then we've got Desmond Ridder, and Ridder was truly pretty horrible for the Falcons last year. He has really bad accuracy. His decision-making isn't particularly good. His running ability is really the only thing that makes him like a decent backup, but he does have starting experience. I do think his running ability is really underrated, honestly. So, I think he can be a high-end backup in this league. Aaron Rodgers, another really tough one to rank, obviously. A couple years ago, he was the best quarterback in the league, and then he had a little bit of a down year, went to the Jets, and tore his Achilles within a couple of minutes of action. So it's impossible to really know what we're getting from Aaron Rodgers. I think for right now, it's probably going to be a great quarterback that we put him in within this cluster of kind of the top half of the league quarterbacks that I would say are not at their elite potential at this point. I think Rodgers is probably in that tier, but he could go anywhere from elite franchise quarterback to, replacement level in the matter of this year alone. So we're going to put him in that tier. Mason Rudolph is pretty terrible. Keaton Slovis, not really sure, honestly, why he's on this list. We're just going to get a couple of other young rookies out of here as well that I don't really foresee them being difference makers in the NFL. Geno Smith is another one that I think is tough. Going to put him in the good quarterback tier with Baker Mayfield. I think that's a very appropriate tier for him. He is a guy that is a little inconsistent. I think that, he is fun to root for. Do I think he's one of the, true amazing players in the league? I don't think so, but I do think that he is a very fun story. I think you can have a pretty decent offense built around him and a good supporting cast. And, he definitely took a big step back from kind of his breakout year last year, but he was still good. He was a top 25 quarterback, top 20 quarterback in the NFL last year, and I think he can certainly be around that mark again. Just at 34, 35 years old, he's probably not going to ascend much past that at this point in his career. Matthew Stafford is somebody that I have been on the hype train for since it was unpopular to be on the hype train for back in Detroit, and I was always kind of crowning him. I still think that based on how he played last year, he was near elite. I think he was a step above a lot of these guys, and he is a true difference maker at that position when he's healthy. And that's going to be the big thing for him is his health, because he's old, he has been beat to absolute hell, and, that takes a toll on a quarterback's body. So I think within Sean McVay's system, when he's operating at full capacity, he is awesome. And with a really pretty underwhelming Rams roster last year, they ended up way overperforming, and I think a huge part of that was Matthew Stafford's play. So I still have him kind of in that near elite tier. I really, really do like him, and I do think that he is an awesome quarterback to root for as well. CJ Stroud is also, I think, already cemented himself in this near elite tier. I think if we see it for another season where he was as good as he was, I think he can absolutely climb into this elite franchise quarterback tier. But I think for now, I want to see what he does with defenses given a chance to adjust to him. Maybe he can be a little bit more of a creator out of structure. That was always kind of the biggest critique of him at Ohio State, but he was lethal from the pocket. He was so, so good. And, one of the most dangerous rookie quarterbacks that I've ever seen. So Major props to CJ Stroud. Already being as high as he is on this list is really impressive. And, hopefully he continues to ascend because he is a ton of fun to watch. Tyrod Taylor also putting in the true backup tier along with Kyle Trask, Carson Wentz as well. And then Zach Wilson, I'm putting in there as well. He is not proven to be anything more than that, and Bailey Zappi as well. So getting the true backup quarterback tier out of here. Jameis Winston is a high-end backup as well. I think that he's probably not more than that at this point in his career. He's a fun, inconsistent type of player, but can snatch a win for you here and there. But if you're starting him on a consistent basis, you're probably in trouble. So that leaves us with these four that are all expected to be starters for their teams this year. Tua Tagovailoa is one of the most difficult conversations I feel like to have a reasonable take on, and I'm going to attempt to do that here. Going to put him in the good quarterback tier. He, much like kind of Brock Purdy, but I think to a lesser extent, is one of those guys that operates a system incredibly well. And I think that he's one of the best quarterbacks for his system that Mike McDaniel runs, but I think he's very one-dimensional, and I do think that he is helped immensely by the talent around him. And I don't think that that means that he's a bad quarterback. I do think he is a good quarterback. He's in this tier here, and, I do think he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL. But you have concerns, first and foremost, about his durability. He was able to stay mostly healthy last year, but still, that's a concern based on what we've seen from him in the past. And then his playmaking ability, his ability to not make stupid decisions pretty much every single week. There's just one or two that are just like, what are you looking at? And I just think that, a lot of their system is getting guys into wide open space and using probably the two fastest receivers in the NFL and using them effectively. And again, Tua does a really good job throwing with anticipation and timing, and he is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at those specific traits. I just think that his true physical traits, his decision-making at times, his playmaking outside the structure of this really interesting scheme by Mike McDaniel is not really super great. And so that's what puts him a step below some of these other quarterbacks that I consider a tier above him. I think he's kind of more in that range of Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. So I'm not sure I would have signed to it to that extension, but I understand why they did. Deshaun Watson, another really difficult conversation because, at one point in his career, he was a great quarterback. I personally, not a fan of him as a person and will most certainly be rooting against him. But to be honest, if you watch the tape, he was thoroughly outplayed by Joe Flacco last year. He was not good for this Browns team. He was terrible. He was a problem for this Browns team. And they're paying him insane money, obviously. But I truly think if you watch the tape, he's not more than like a replacement level player. And I think that can be proven by them signing 40-year-old Joe Flacco off the couch and him outperforming Deshaun Watson and the Browns being better with Joe Flacco in the game. So I'm not saying Deshaun Watson doesn't have it in him. I believe I ranked him as a near elite quarterback last year. So, the potential is absolutely there. But at some point, that was like 4 years ago that we actually saw good Deshaun Watson. And we haven't seen it for a long time. When he has been out there, he has looked like a replacement level player. So for now, that's where he's going to be ranked. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to be in this unproven young high potential tier. You can't really put him any higher until we actually see him play. In the preseason, he looked super exciting, like a true playmaker. I still think within the structure of the offense, which was my main concern with him, maybe he's not going to be this elite, carve him up type of passer. But outside of structure, he is probably the only guy that really rivals Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, those kinds of guys. So I absolutely think he's going to be in this probably tier here by the end of the season. We just don't know how good he's going to be. And then Bryce Young, I do also think is in this kind of tier here. I made a whole video about Bryce Young explaining why I do think they could be much better this year, why Bryce Young maybe had a terrible situation. He didn't help himself either, but I do think that they could turn things around and he could be a decent quarterback in this league. I think that, time will tell with Bryce Young. They're still very early and he had a terrible supporting cast around him, but I do think time is ticking for him to kind of show that he can be that number one worthy overall pick that the Panthers drafted him to be. So that's going to do it for my 2024-2025 tier list here. Let me know who I have too high, who I have too low. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. While you're down there, hit the like button as well. Helps push this video out to other NFL and NFL draft fans just like you. Truly means the world to me, so I appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching. I will catch you in the next one.